This video will provide an overview of the lessons for week 27, days 47 through 51. This week, students will end task 4 with a final reflection before starting task 5, Extreme Living Solutions. First, on day 47, students will wrap up task 4 by reflecting on their work and making connections to the cross-cutting concepts of the unit. Then, on day 48, students will start to brainstorm ideas for task 5, in which they will design a product that minimizes or maximizes thermal energy transfer. The following day, students will share their ideas in a group brainstorming session. Next, students will further hone their ideas by discussing the criteria and constraints for their products, as well as by gathering inspiration from task 4 to inspire the design of their products. Finally, this week, students will draw a design diagram to use for building a prototype of their product. Let's go through the key points from each day, starting with the lesson for day 47. Now that students have completed their work for task 4, they will wrap up the evaluate phase with a final reflection. On the final page of the student handout, students will have an opportunity to reflect and make connections on their learning so far. To begin, students will think back to one of the very first images from task 4. Students should look back at their hypothesis about the scenario of the metal spoon in the pot of hot pasta. What can they change or add on to their response? Next, students should make connections to the cross-cutting concept of scale, proportion, and quantity. How was that concept connected to their own independent investigation about changes in temperature? Finally, as always, students should generate new questions about temperature, thermal energy, heat, and how those concepts connect to the culminating project for the unit. On day 48, students will start task 5, Extreme Living Solutions, in which students will design and create a prototype of a product that minimizes or maximizes thermal energy transfer for people to use who live in extreme climate regions. This task is very open-ended. The students' products could relate to clothing, housing, heating or cooling devices, and other ideas they come up with. In order to be successful, students will have to apply their knowledge of temperature and thermal energy transfer, that thermal energy moves from areas of higher to lower temperature only, that thermal energy is stored in molecules as kinetic energy, the energy of movement. It will also be helpful to review with students that some materials are good conductors. That means they transfer thermal energy easily. Metals are especially good conductors of energy. On the other hand, materials that do not transfer energy easily are insulators. A vacuum is the best insulator because only radiation can travel through it. There are no particles in a vacuum to transfer thermal energy via conduction or convection. Air is also an excellent insulator because there is so much space between the particles. The first couple days of task 5 are all about brainstorming ideas. Help students begin their brainstorming by first having them list the products and devices that they themselves use to preserve heat at home in the winter or cool their homes down in the summer, or themselves. Are there any products or devices they wish they had that they currently don't? Then give students a chance to share their ideas so far. This might help students come up with even more ideas and have more to work with in the next phase of brainstorming. Remind students of the culminating project for the unit and clarify any questions they might have. Then it's time to get brainstorming. Students will create a design board in the student handout using Google Drawing. A separate video included with the slides for day 48 models this process, as well as the process of group brainstorming on day 49. Wrap up day 48 by asking students to pick 2 of the products from their list and explain how those products might benefit people living in areas with extreme climates. On day 49, students will continue their brainstorming in groups. Help students continue to make connections between their ideas so far and the concepts from task 4. How do the products they've come up with use ideas of temperature and thermal energy transfer? Next, students will share their ideas from the previous day in groups using Google Jamboard to create a group design board. They'll add their group's ideas to their own student handouts as well. A separate video included with the slides for day 48 includes instructions for this activity. After sharing ideas, students should reflect on the benefits of their chosen product. How would it work? How would it help people who live in extreme climates? On day 50, students will refine the design of their chosen product by engaging with the design process. The design process involves first redefining the problem or product in terms of criteria and constraints, gathering inspiration from existing products and research, drawing and building a prototype, then testing the prototype. Help students identify the criteria and constraints of their chosen products. Criteria are the requirements of the product and how they will know if their product is successful. What does it need to do? How will they know whether or not it works? Constraints are the limits on the product. What can it not have? What problems might make it difficult to create or use the product? For example, if we are designing an insulated container to keep food or drink items hot in a cold climate, the requirements could include things like big enough to hold the food, light enough weight to be easily portable, durable, washable. How will we know if it works? To measure the success of the product, we would need to test it out by putting hot food in it and then measuring the temperature of the food over time. If the temperature of the food stays high for the desired amount of time, then we know the product is successful. Constraints are the limitations. For example, there might be a size or weight limit on our insulated food box. We might put a limit on how low the temperature of the food inside can get. Cost and availability of materials are also important constraints that the students will absolutely face as well. When designing a product, it's rarely necessary to start from scratch. Gather inspiration by examining existing versions of the product. Students will also return to the results of their investigations in Task 4 as evidence for designing an even better product. Students should write out their plans on page 5 in the student handout. On the top half of the page, students will outline the criteria and constraints of their product's design. Then, at the bottom, students should bring in evidence from Task 4, as well as other outside research they've done to further inspire their designs. Finally, on day 51, students will continue designing their products by drawing plans to make a prototype. In their groups, students will need to agree on which materials they will use to build their product. It's important to emphasize that students will need to actually build a usable version of their product in order to test it out. Sometimes students don't understand that they will need to physically create their design, which may lead them to plan unrealistic designs. Make sure they discuss and use only materials that they actually have access to. Review where you are in the design process. This will help students see the continuity between the planning phase and the drawing or building phase, as well as consider what they will need to do in order to realistically build and test their product. Make sure that students return to their previous work in the student handout so that they can use their criteria and constraints when creating their drawing. They must also consider the structure, materials, size, and mechanism of their product, especially with regard to how realistic it is for them to actually build. Students have several options to draw their prototype. They may simply use pens or pencils, a ruler, and paper, or they can use Google Drawing or another drawing app that they're already familiar with. Or they may wish to set up a free account with Tinkercad, a website for creating 3D drawings and plans. A separate video included with the slides for day 51 goes into more detail about how to set up an account and how to use many of the features in Tinkercad to create a drawing. Finally, students should create a video describing their product and prototype, what it is and what it's for and how it works. They should include the materials they will use and should explain their drawing. What do the shapes represent? What is the scale or size of the prototype? How does the prototype actually work? When they're finished, students should post their videos using Padlet or Flipgrid. Remember that the slides for each lesson come with a cover slide with links to Google Docs and other materials, and the following slides provide helpful content background information, suggestions for teaching synchronously or asynchronously, language development supports, and supports for ELs and students with disabilities. Those are the major tasks and key points for week 27, as students wrap up Task 4 and begin Task 5, Extreme Living Solutions.